sad about that.
And
well,
we're
nice
live, everybody. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Mentor Project's Optimizing Your Success. I am Dr. Ruth Gotian. I am so excited to be here with all of you and with all of my high-achieving friends. And we have a great topic today, which has a lot to do with honesty and why some people aren't. And we're going to take a deep dive from somebody who studied this for over 15 years. So I am really excited because we have all met those dishonest people. So before we kick it off to our guest today, I would really love my high achieving friends to give us a quick introduction so we know who they are and what angle they're coming from, starting with Dr. Susan Bernstone.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. I'm Dr. Susan Bernstone, and I am a psychotherapist, a systems psychotherapist, and I work with people in terms of their relationships with everyone, with people, with systems, and I look to improve the most important relationship of all. That is the relationship that people have with themselves. So I'm really interested, Ron, in this whole notion of why people don't tell the truth. And my hunch is there is an angle about it where people are not comfortable within themselves. But we'll talk more about that. I'm also a producer and host of a television talk show, and I'm a professor and lots of other fun things. So I'm so happy to be here tonight.
Thanks, Susan. Janice Lintz, and I know this topic has your name all over it, not because you're someone who doesn't tell the truth, but because you're faced with these people on a daily, hourly basis.
Yes, I'm super excited about this. Most people know me for hearing access, but I'm also someone who testifies about corruption in the judicial system. I'm an attorney who's on retirement status, and I've testified before the Judiciary Committee in Congress, the Moreland Commission, the New York County Bar Association, and I write for Medium about corruption in the courts. And so this, to me, is a fascinating conversation since I was on the phone today with the governor's office in New York State, trying to understand about the corruption in our courts. So I'm looking forward to this. Oh, and by the way, I'm traveling to every country in the world, just on a side note.
Pre and post pandemic.
Yes, pre and post pandemic.
Thank you, Janice. Devin Harris, I hope you did not meet people who are not honest in your line of work.
That's I think not meeting people who are not honest is a tall order for even for
think so.
3-time Olympian, original member of the Jamaican bobsled team. My claim to fame. Always so wonderful to be able to hang out with this amazing group of high achievers. Man, you guys make me look like I'm a slacker. I'm gonna have to get.
I don't think so.
I'm gonna have to get busy, but it's great to hang out. And Ron, great to meet you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say about honesty. Speak the truth and speak it ever, cost it what it will. He who hides the wrong he does the wrong thing still. I learned that in elementary school.
Amen.
Ooh, I like that. Dr. Bruce Wiley. What is that background today?
Well, unfortunately, I have no poetry to offer. But today, May 24th, is National Escargot Day.
Oh, Bruce. Oh.
Now, I have to say, I first saw that joke in the movie Trading Places, talking about painting an S on a car, but this is taking another step. So I'm a professor, writer, journalist, computer modeler, and celebrator of Escargot Day.
Yeah, Bruce likes to surprise us every week. He has that fancy green screen, so he always puts us these backgrounds, and we need to guess what it is, what special day it is. But what's more exciting is that Bruce writes for Forbes. And he puts in these unique words into his articles. And we try to challenge him every week with a word that has come up in today's conversation that he should use it in an upcoming article. So we have gotten him to use tiara, cherry pie, right?
Unitard.
Well, unitard, yes. That was a shout out to Devin. So if you guys have ideas of what words Bruce should put in, just go put it in the chat for us. Thanks, Bruce. Susie Katz.
Hi, I'm a photographer. I photographed in about 70 countries, but over the past 15 years, I spent most of my time on my educational nonprofit Photo Wings, which has taken me all over the world, interviewing hundreds of the best photographers in the world. And along the lines of this topic, sometimes it's what they say and what they don't say, and the context in which they say it. So we're trying to help people learn how to utilize photography in ways they might not have thought of in terms of resilience, critical thinking, ethics, and that kind of thing.
Love it. Thank you, Susie. And before we get to our guest today, everybody who's watching all over the world, let us know where you're watching us from. If you could just put it in the chat. And if you have any questions for our guest or any of my high achieving friends, just let us know, put it in the chat, and we will do our best to answer it. Now on to our special guest, and this is a very, very special night for him, and I'm so excited that he is spending it with us. Ron Carucci.
Hey, everybody. What a thrill to be among such great friends and thinkers and doers in the world. Thank you so much for having me, Ruth. It's a real honor. It is indeed the eve of book launch. So tomorrow, my next book, number 9, to be honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose, will make its arrival in the United States. It's like the Olympic torch is making its way around the world. It started in London and made its way throughout the rest of the planet. And tomorrow it finishes its debut here. And of course, I'm just giddy delighted to be having that happen after many, many, many years of research and work. When I'm not writing, which is not my primary living, I'm actually managing partner of a consulting firm where I'm co-founder and co-owner called Navalent, where we spend our days working alongside executives leading very large and complicated enterprises who are in the throes of some type of very aspirational transformation. Maybe they're gotten themselves in a ditch, or they're avoiding a ditch, or they're trying to create some new opportunity for their customers or their employees. And so my colleagues and I spend our days as mostly organizational psychologists working in systems areas and thinking in areas of strategy and identity, in areas of organization design and culture, and in areas of leadership development. But our take on leadership is much more of a deeper personal one. Like you, Susan, we get deep under the hood to unearth what some of those problematic behaviors might be and go dig them out. So that's how I spend most of my days. On other days, I spend time writing for a Harvard Business Review and also write for Forbes. When I'm not doing that and researching, I'm in the middle of, right now I'm in temporary housing because we're moving from Seattle to the Northeast. And we're in the middle of moving. So you see this strange fake set behind me is because I'm in a rental apartment. We're about to start the next chapter of our family's life here, which is basically coming home for us, where our family and friends and all of our roots are.
Wow. Thank you. And Ron, the name of your book and what we're going to be talking about it's called To Be Honest. And tomorrow it launches in the United States. It already launched all over the rest of the world earlier this month. And you'll read a review about it that I have in Psychology Today in early June. So Ron, tell us, this is about 15 years of research with 210 organizations and 3,200 interviews. As someone who does qualitative research, that is a ton of interviews. Tell us a little bit about what the catalyst was for this book, why you did it, what you found. Give us a deep dive.
Sure.
We really want to know.
So it's a 15-year longitudinal study. So the data spans that long. We spent about 5 years doing it. We got to use some really, really cool technology in IBM Watson. So we used some AI to sort of help us statistically model the data. We're all sick of the stories, the Wells Fargo stories, the Volkswagen stories, the Theranos. We just can't wince anymore at those. And I thought, what? And of course, you're all brilliant, practitioners. We hear it was the culture, or it was a few bad apples. And those explanations are so painfully unsatisfying. Yeah. And I thought, there's got to be a way to know. There's got to be a way to know more. Under what conditions do people behave fairly, tell the truth, and serve a greater good? And under what conditions do they lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first? There's got to be a way to know. And I thought, well, what if we could find out? So in the spirit of sort of defying academic logic, we decided not to go in with a hypothesis, but we fed the 3,200 interviews into the AI and said, you tell us what the hypothesis would be. If you're that intelligent, you figure out what we should be asking you. And it came back with these really fascinating drill sites for correlations. And that's how AI works, to find correlatable concepts. And it began to really find these very interesting concepts correlating honesty, truth-telling. And what was fascinating to us is that it linked to the concepts of justice and purpose, right? Meaning, and if you think about, I mean, and really, Susan, you understand how the brain works, right? That these are all the same parts of our brain. And so what was fascinating to us was that today, because our experience of honesty has gone through the floor, right? Our expectations of it have only gone through the roof. So it's no longer enough not to lie. That is not the bar for being honest. That might get you a nice person label, but today you have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason, even when it's hard. Truth, justice, and purpose. So the book defines honesty as all three.
Wow, truth, justice, and purpose. So how does a regular person do that, and how do leaders actually show the other people on their team how to do it? And that's the expectation. So
we found in the research that the data came back with, we got flashed. 4 conditions. So there were 4 predictors of conditions that would tell us, and they're all statistically modeled, under which people will either determine whether they will tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good, and under which conditions they won't. So I'll tell you what those 4 are. And I'll give you the statistics behind each. So the first one was what we call clarity and identity, meaning be who you say you are. So all of our organizations have on their walls words of who we say we are. We have values, we have purpose statements, we have visions, we have missions, we have declarations we make. Turns out these promises actually have to count. So
shocking.
Go figure, right? So if you're in an organization where the actions and words match, meaning the experience of the employees and of your external partners actually aligns those, you are 3 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good.
So all you're saying is you have to be who you say you are?
That's condition number 1. There's 3 more. If, however, those words are cosmetic only, meaning they're for the wall, for external consumption, but we all know that's not really what happens around here, right? You've now institutionalized duplicity. You've now said around here, we say one thing, but we do another. Well, nobody's going to go, oh, but that's just for the mission, but everything else we have to sort of align. No, once you've told people we say one thing and do another, now you've given them permission to do that in everything. Now, you're 3 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and serve their own interests first.
Wow.
So how many times would you ask your leaders, so what are your company values? What's your purpose statement? Or ask, do you guys live by your values? And do you get, oh, yes. Do you get, well, what do you get? Yeah, right. Well, you've now inserted risk. You've now inserted risk. Condition number 2, accountability. You know that one. So if the way we measure contribution, not rewarded, but measure contribution, meaning the way I contribute, if I perceive it to be fair, so all of you academics know procedural fairness, right? If I perceive it to be consistent with what I believe happened, you're now 4 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good. But if I believe it's not fair, if I believe that, and the 2 factors were dignity and fairness, meaning I have an equal chance of success, and I'm treated with, my contributions and I are treated with the dignity I deserve. And here's the catch. Most of our accountability systems grew up in an era of counting widgets, of counting repeatable, right? Those systems didn't evolve with our work. Today, my remit isn't 100 t-shirts. My remit is my idea, my creativity, my ingenuity, my insight, my analysis. Today, the contributor and the contribution are more fused than ever, right? So you can no longer scale sameness as if it's fairness, right? Trying to neutralize that variance, and because my contribution is unique as me. So if I do not feel like you have talked about my contribution as an understanding of the reflection of me that it is, that's not fair. You may think it's sameness, but it's not fairness. So now you're 4 times more likely to have me lie, cheat, and serve my own interests, because now I embellish my accomplishments and hide my mistakes.
Wow.
Condition 3, transparency in decision making. If I walk into a room, and we all know what those are, meetings, and I believe that the decision we are there to make, the problem we're there to solve, and the data being presented around those things is reliable, meaning I don't feel like I'm being rused. I don't feel like it's orchestrated theater. I don't believe like it's performance art, but that I'm getting given a straight shot. I'm hearing dueling fact bases, and my voice to dissent is welcome. It is safe enough for me to disagree and push back and offer alternatives. If that's the case in that room, you are 3.5 times more likely to have people tell the truth and behave fairly and serve a greater good in that room.
So you're talking about the psychological safety.
That's one part of it. So every one of these factors, in all 4 of them, they 1.03 of the factor was psychological safety.
Yeah. Okay.
And because the way AI is kind of like a raptor, dinosaur, can always see things in motion. So the AI see it as improving or reducing, getting worse.
Okay.
So it's you add 1.03 if it's getting better, you lose it if it's getting worse.
Okay.
You walk in that room and there's winks and nods. There was deals cut before the room happened. You're trying to create the illusion of empowerment. I call it faux inclusion, to make it look like I'm actually being involved and engaged in a choice I know you've already made. If the data being presented has been scrubbed, if the data being presented is not all there, and I know that, or I suspect it, or I question the motives of the person presenting it, and I have good reason to. If I do not believe that my voice is welcome, or that my dissent and view will be valued, now you're 3.5 times more likely to have people lie, cheat, and join the collusion with you.
Wow.
And the last one, probably the most surprising one, was cross-functional partnership. The seams. What happens at the seams? So if at your critical intersections, we all know them, sales and marketing, supply chain operations, R&D and marketing, all the places where true value gets created, right? But where we have our greatest tribalism and our greatest border wars, right? If those seams are stitched, meaning there's cohesion, there's unity, there's 1 + 1 = 3, there's acceptance, there's no we, they, there's no this, the schegrams, but there's true unification, true integration at those seams, you are 6 times more likely to have people tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good. But if you have border wars, if there's we and they, if there's, because when you fragment the organization and you have silos, right? If you fragment the organization, you fragment the truth. Now it's no longer about finding the truth. It's about my truth versus your truth. And once that happens, I'm sure Susan can tell you, it's no longer about the truth. It's about you're right, you're wrong, and I'm right. And that's the conversation. And when that happens, now you're 6 times more likely to have people lie and cheat and win. Here's the hardest part about these models. They're cumulative. The way the statistics work is that you add them up. So if you're good at all 4 of those things, if you can master all 4 of those things, you are raising the odds by a factor of 16 times more likely that the people in your organization will tell the truth, behave fairly, and serve a greater good. But if you suck at all 4, you are 16 times more likely to find yourself on the cover of a New York Times article you never wanted to be in.
Wow. All right. So let's summarize those 4. Go ahead. Number 1, Ron, was?
Clarity, identity. Be who you say you are. Justice and accountability. Treat people with dignity and fairness. Transparency and governance. Clear decision-making processes. And cross-functional unity. Partnerships at the seams.
Wow. All right. Who is this unicorn organization that has all this?
Oh my gosh, they're out there. That was the fun. So this book is a book of heroes. I want to write about the people who are doing it. And no company is perfect. But here's the cool part. It's not all or nothing. We play with the statistical models. We play with them. It's okay. If we increase transparency and governance by 18%, what do we get? You get incremental improvements in honesty in all 3 things. So you can improve in all of them. It's not all or nothing. That's the good news. The bad news is you choose to ignore those at your own peril. Our meetings are nice enough. We mean the mission statement. We're nice people in our performance appraisals. Do your people say, wow, I can't wait for my performance review? Are they saying that? We don't have out and out trench warfare at the seams. Sure, sometimes there's a little conflict, but that's just normal. If you hear yourself saying things like that, You're just saying, go to your board of directors and say, hey, we're okay with a little risk. We're not 16 times more likely, but maybe we're only 8 times more likely to have people lie and cheat. You okay with that? See what your board says. In fact, ask the audit committee if they're okay with that. Just curious to see if the audit committee's okay with your accepting that level of risk of misconduct.
Wow. So who are the organizations that actually do this or do this better?
My gosh, there are so many. So Best Buy, Hubert Jolie's recent turnaround of Best Buy, beautiful example of living purpose. Ginger Graham was the CEO of Guidon Corporation in the 90s and early 2000s. Phenomenal example of truth telling and transparency. Ed Townley, the CEO of Cabot Creamery, inherited a mess there. His opening move as CEO was sending people to jail. That was committed to honesty. But the way he unified those themes in that organization was beautiful. Actually, it's also one of my recent Forbes articles. Accountability, Microsoft, doing a phenomenal job at honoring the dignity of people and individuals there. Talked to Kathleen Hogan, the Chief People Officer there, and got some incredible stories there. So, and there's many others in the book. There's beautiful examples of leaders, and a lot of the companies I talked to on the B Corp community, not surprisingly.
Wow.
And so the great news is there are leaders and companies of all sizes all over the world. Skanska in Europe, talk about unity across the seams, doing great jobs in their diversity and inclusion work in Sweden. Each chapter opens up. I wanted to zoom out. I didn't want leaders to only focus on business stories. So each chapter zooms out with a much bigger story. I wanted to go scour the planet and find stories nobody expects. So Jacinda Ardern's story of how she led the pandemic in New Zealand. Phenomenal example of transparency. I wanted to understand the ultimate in cross-border rivalries. So I went down to LA and I talked to rivaling gang members. So I talked to people from the Crips and the Bloods.
Oh my God. Wow.
Two guys that came out of the gang, from each gang, and started a business together, right? They'd be in and out of jail. Two incredible African-American men who should have hated each other, who should have been dead, who, in the stories of shootings and police, horrible things they experienced. And together they started this incredible business, a food business, to sort of give back to the community. And it's a phenomenal story. And the thrill to go down to LA and spend time in their hood with them at their food truck, just talking to them and hearing their story. If they can figure out how to stitch that seam, the rest of us have no excuse. Marin Alsop, who's the woman at the Baltimore Symphony who started Orch Kids in Baltimore to help underprivileged kids. Story of incredibly living purpose. Brian Stevenson, the man who started the National Justice Initiative, the Equal Justice Initiative in Baltimore. Phenomenal example of living your purpose. So each chapter opens up with a zoomed out, let's go look at a different part of the world, and a different part of your life. Accountability. You think about the practice, I'm sure you know what this is, restorative justice, where you do work where you bring reconciliation. I went to the Congo because the tribal peace courts for women there are incredibly restorative for women who don't get justice there. And I studied a case of an older woman who had her land stolen and how the peace courts brought justice there. Because if our accountability systems could mirror what restorative justice does, keeping the dignity of community, keeping community intact, telling the truth about what actually happened, holding people to account and making restoration, how much more dignifying our accountability systems would be. So I went and found a great case there and brought it into the book. So those are the kinds of stories I wanted to tell. I wanted leaders to not just go look at the typical business case. There's plenty of business cases in there. But each chapter zooms out to say, let's think bigger here.
Wow. And Ron, was there any company that you found that actually did all 4 things?
I think all the companies I studied do all of them reasonably well. So I chose each chapter to highlight certain aspects of what they do, but it would be very difficult to do one of these well and suck at 3 of them, right? To do one of them well, you're reasonably okay in all of them. Now, no company, especially like Microsoft at 140,000 employees, is probably going to be perfect in all sections and all parts of it. But if you're at the enterprise level, if your intent is to excel and there's priorities set and there are initiatives in place to help you excel, you're on your way, right? It's a journey. It's not just, no one's ever going to be perfectly honest because we're full of humans. And I'm sure, as Susan would attest, when you have humans in place, one of the things I talk about throughout the book. So every section of the book is designed in 2 forms. The first chapter of each 2-chapter section is about the system. The second chapter is about the individual. So what you can do to be more honest. And I challenge people. I ask very hard questions, Susan. Why do you lie? Because the answer is not, and I'm sure Susan's going to nod, the answer is not random. When you are your worst version of yourself, when you're deceitful, when you embellish something, when you hide something, there's a reason you do it. And there's a pattern behind how you do it. And if you can't get to the narrative that taught you that this is not a safe place to tell the truth, I can't be who I am, I can't disclose something, you're covering something. There's a wound you're protecting. There's a need you're trying to meet. Today, the meme I put on Facebook was this. All of us have a desire and hunger to know we matter. But when that hunger and need goes unmet, we devote ourselves to a dangerous counterfeit, looking like we matter. And that takes us down a very slippery slope. And the words to every slippery slope are paved with, at least I'm not as bad as.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Susie, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Susie, you're muted, Susie.
Oh. Okay. What you're saying reminds me of a quote that I heard years ago. If you ain't who you is who you ain't. And I've always liked that. I'm really curious about how the brain is wired. There's some people that they are just wired to not necessarily do good things, particularly when there's power and there's profit involved. When I first moved to San Francisco many years ago, everybody was warm and open and friendly. And then the tech bubble came in and it changed the environment quite a bit. And I'm just curious about how the brain is wired.
I love the question, Susie. So we talked to a lot of neuroscientists and did a lot of neuroscience work. It turns out the best news ever, our brains are naturally hardwired for honesty. We thrive when we're told the truth and we tell the truth, when we behave fairly true to others well. Here's the catch. Under alternative conditions, if we remain, we'll succumb. And that's the challenge. We will slip, right? And there are slippery slopes. There are no slippery ascents. And so, unfortunately, unlike our cell phones that have a restore factory settings button on them, our brains don't have a restore factory settings button on them. And so you can relearn your natural instincts for truth and honesty and purpose, but left to the wrong, and I think that explains some of the horrific stories we've had. It seems to be every week now. But you think about, 5,000 people didn't wake up at Wells Fargo all on the same day and go, "Hey, here's an idea," right? So the conditions had to be there to invite them there. But that's not the natural state we start with. The natural state our brains start with is for justice, for dignity. What's really cool about the brain, and you can comment on this, Susan, our brains are naturally, the connection for self-respect, for self-esteem, is the connection between our reward center and the center for that monitors what others think of us, right? We take those measurements, and together that's the neural pathway that cultivates self-esteem. Well, that means managers have a disproportionate role to play in cultivating people's sense of self, especially today when you're evaluating their work, because today when you evaluate the work, you're evaluating them. So if managers understood what dignity was required in that conversation, how much more of a stronger sense of self could you give people? But when you demean them or belittle them, or even inadvertently belie them, you create the conditions where they have to hide. And when you've done that, once you're starting to hide, now you have to keep that illusion up. Once I've hidden, I now have to stay hidden, and that's work. And now you've decided to not be true to yourself. And you can't be true to yourself if you're not going to be true about yourself. And you ain't who you is if you is who you ain't, right? So now, once I made the decision to not be true to myself or be true about myself, I now have to keep that in motion. And all the energy I could be devoting to doing great work and my best work, the company, I now have to keep up that illusion of who I want you to think I am.
Sounds exhausting.
It's exhausting, isn't it?
Sounds exhausting.
Who want to get up and do that?
Devin, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you. Ron, thank you so much. As I'm listening to these 4 factors, and I am thinking beyond companies and corporations and institutions. I'm thinking of the political realm. And I'm here thinking that maybe not all of them, 99.9% of them from my perspective, are failing in all these 4 factors here.
Miserably.
But here's the kicker, though. I have to believe that all of us have a sense of justice and purpose and truth and honesty. And yet we see these people not living up to who they say they are. They're not being accountable, etc., etc. But we support them. So the question is, what is it about us that cause? Are we delusional? Or have we deluded ourselves? What's the deal here, man?
It's a great question, Devin. Gosh, I love that question. You know, here's my hunch, and we watched it for the last 8 years. Most of us as shocked. It was like watching a bad car accident, right? You have to sort of put your head down and like, but am I really watching this? I think we've lost faith in the system. I think most of us believe it's a sense of futility. I think my voice doesn't count. If you haven't read Michael Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, it's a beautiful, painful example of how people have lost faith in the political system, who have left them behind. I think we don't believe, and I think there are candidates who come from unorthodox backgrounds who start on an idealistic and optimistic but wildly naive sense of what they're able to do. The political system is so corrupted by power systems, by special interest groups, by money, that if you actually measure the amount of time, let's just look at our federal government for a minute. The members of Congress spend about 70% of their time having to raise money for the next election. You know, which leaves them 30% of the time to do the incompetent job of doing a problem solving.
Yeah.
So the job has changed. So you start not being who you say you are, right? Because you're not a legislator, you're a fundraiser. And so when your constituents are depending on you to represent their interests and they're funding it, you never get to go and represent the individuals you say you represent. So you start off duplicitous in many of those roles. I think same is probably true for state and local governments as well. So the system is broken, and we have lost our own sense of agency. Right? We're the bosses. I mean, if last year the approval rating of Congress is 18%. In what world do you get to keep your job when you're performing at an 18? In what world do you get to stay a student if that's your grade? So I have the same baffling, Devin, of why do we let them keep their jobs? Well, it's not like there's it's not like the best talent in the world is flocking to take those jobs, right? So we're already getting the bottom of the rubble as candidates. So we're starting with the B- team at best, right? Because
that's an interesting perspective. Yeah,
the A team already went to the private sector. Sometimes the retirees are coming out of the private sector to sort of lend their hand to, local service. There's a phenomenal group in Boston called A New Politics. I love what they're doing. This woman found out, she did a bunch of research, and she found out that some of the best civil servants, the ones who really went to serve, and to your point, Devin, did it right, like some do, came out of the Peace Corps, Teach for America, or the U.S. military, because their sense of service was so well grounded. Yeah. So she went around and started recruiting people from those organizations to get them to run for public office. She raised money for their campaigns, and she's now probably put, 40 or 50 people into office, Republicans and Democrats, local, state, and federal levels. Wow. And she's draining the swamp from one person at a time and just replacing the DNA, because she found out who are the ones actually making a difference. And they all had those kinds of backgrounds. So I'm like, can we just get her millions of dollars? Can she go faster? Can we transfer the DNA quicker? So I do believe there's hope. But gosh, Devin, it is painful to watch.
Yeah, it is.
It's painful to watch, because they're the ones you have to presume as leaders, when we choose them, we somehow identify with them, and then we're going to collude with them, right? So then the problem with groupthink is then you have to defend them, right? You have to ignore the blind spots. You can't. Look at the political discourse; it's become so horrible, right? We can't even talk about it's either you have to vilify one side and heroify the other side, and so we can't even have honest discourse about. They're all flawed. Can't be honest about that. And so now we can't even have good civil discourse, about the common good, because we're so enwrapped to our politically bad choices.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, Janice, you deal with this kind of lying, cheating, stealing, all of the negative stuff on an almost daily basis, and how you stay sane through all of it, I will never know. But I am so curious what you think about all of this.
This is just absolutely enlightening, because this was I couldn't explain it as clear, but the conversation I was having with the Assistant General Counsel for Governor Cuomo today on these issues. So now I spoke to a bunch of people in the court system in the state of New York, in Manhattan. And the one thing that came out, and I'm curious how you recommend fixing it, was that because of unions, and I'm not saying this about across the board of everyone, but because of unions and civil service jobs, people who do a bad job can't be fired. And as a result of these people not being fired, it creates this setting of like, why bother? And just like you said, at least I'm not as bad as. That's practically what the person said, right? And they said, and like they had someone, they said that if this was a business, they would have fired this person today. But they couldn't because they had to go through the union, and the person is connected to someone because of cronyism. And as a result, what does someone do if they're in this system, when you can't just fire people? How do you eliminate them because of the unions? And I'm not saying unions are bad. That's not but there is a point where the unions are problematic when you can't fire people. What do you do?
Well, so I love the question, Janice. It's a really, and you know what? The unions are one mechanism. I've been in the private sector in many companies where it's like, we don't fire people around here, right? So the interesting thing about when you think about the process of accountability is that if you're already at the question of termination, my question is, okay, what's gone on for the last 2 years, right? Because do you somehow get some dead wood and some duds sometimes? Sure. But my question is, if I followed that person home and watched them at the bowling alley that weekend, or watched them at the softball game that night, I'm going to see energy, passion, conviction, whatever. So it's not that they're not motivated; it's just that they're not motivated around you. So what was the accountability? I mean, there are plenty of accountability systems. There are documentation. There are all kinds of ways. I want to talk to the lazy manager who's not doing their job, right? So let's talk about the system in which we're cultivating performance here and setting expectations. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says to themselves, how can I go to work today and be a dud? What could I do to really be bored, look lethargic, and make people think I'm a real loser today? How could I do that? No one says that. So are some people harder to find a connection with and spark the best out of them than others? Absolutely. But that's your job. That's why you're called a manager. And so, my question is, what's been done? What hard conversations have been had? What truth-telling conversations have been had? What sometimes to take them back to the back of the shed has happened to earn their trust? Because if they're doing a bad job and letting the team down and underperforming, they know it. They're not that stupid, and so they don't feel good about it. But their defiance of being able to tell you can't touch me is the one source of gratification they have. Well, if they've gotten that far to be gratified by that, you missed the opportunity well before that. So now you have to do the work to unwind, to say, do you want to come to work every day here and be miserable and cause other people to be miserable? Is that your goal?
So you actually have to ask them, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Do you feel good about your job? Do you come to work every day and feel proud of what you're doing? Are you satisfied with how this is going? We're not, but I'm curious if you are. And have an honest, hard conversation with them about their contribution. Because if you start with the premise that on some level they want to contribute, they want to feel proud. I mean, we've seen people from the hardest, disadvantaged, invisible disabilities, all kinds of reasons, who had every right to be unmotivated and deadwood, come to work on fire, right? So how do you explain that? So it's not that you can't get the best out of people in difficult environments, union environments, civil servant jobs, low paying, low wage, high labor janitors, right? Jobs. There are some people in those roles who still come to work every day and whistling and dancing and doing their best work. So it is possible to get great performance out of anybody in any role. The question is, what are you doing as the leader to see that happens? If you're the victim of their bad performance, you don't understand your job as a leader.
And I think, Bruce, you probably see the opposite in academia. I mean, you probably see that, but you also see the promotion by failure, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the issues is you have mixed incentives. When you it seems like a lot of these kind of established systems and organizations have very, the incentives are off. So certain people might be incentivized if they want to kind of move up or get promoted. And I think that I've seen that many times. So how do you what do you do in those types of situations? Because the
Well,
system itself.
So I think that it's, the issue of, I think tenure is one of the most worst parts of academia, right? It was a big mistake. And I think that in some cases it actually just proliferates evil, because our students are paying enormous dollars and they're suffering. They're not getting the best of those teachers. But if you zoom out, what's really bizarre to me in higher ed, and I've taught in numbers of universities as a faculty, is higher ed doesn't even understand the boiling water it is as a frog. They don't even understand that it's an institution that's crumbling, right? That major corporations are deciding don't need a 4-year degree anymore, right? So the irrelevance that is encroaching on higher ed, they seem to be in incredible denial over it. They're poo-pooing the notion of for-profit schools, of online education. They're poo-pooing the notion that big companies are going directly to schools and building curriculum with them. Somehow academia has decided they're impervious, right? And the minute you decide you're impervious to consequences, and you don't see levers like tenure as one of the reasons that makes you that way. We've seen empires fall before. I think that's one of the empires we're seeing fall now. So when it comes to incentives, Bruce, I think incentives play a lever. If you over rely on them to incent performance, you actually get worse, right? Because people do not come to work every day. There is gazillions of studies at many universities. Money is not the number one. Incentives are not the top driver of best performance. Meaning, purpose, contribution, acknowledgement, recognition. Those play far greater roles in the determination of somebody's discretionary efforts and sacrificial efforts to get performance before money.
Especially for high achievers, Ron.
Especially for high achievers, right? Even more so, like probably by a factor of 2 or 3, Ruth.
Yeah.
So,
I guess a question I had was, so you look at a lot of organizations, companies, academic organizations, healthcare, et cetera, and then you look at, so it's one thing when an organization is smaller, and they know to put the customer first, and everything's focused on service. But then when you have maybe a giant organization where the incentive is shareholder value, or the incentive, like in maybe an academic organization is bring in that money with a contract, et cetera, then you're incentivizing behavior that's different from the core mission.
Absolutely.
Of the organization itself.
And that's when you get duplicity, right? That's when you get duplicitous behavior. And I think that's why the BSR, the business roundtable, we wrote the statement of corporations, because now they're really introducing stakeholder. To be honest, opens up with a whole look at stakeholder capitalism and what it really means. Well, there are stakeholder capitalism for higher ed too, right? It can't just be your donors, and it can't just be your grantors. God willing, one day it'll be students. Much less the broader world for which you publish and write. But when you over-index on certain stakeholders at the absolute expense of the needs of others, which is what corporate America has done for a long time, you get the situation we're in now, right? The organizations that I studied that balance the stakeholders they care about, and as Hubert Joly would say, treat profit as an outcome, not a goal, you get a very different set of outcomes. And so I think multi-stakeholder views of an organization's purpose are evolving, and I think will continue to gain lots of traction. Because here's the thing: here's what the other great part of the data: the companies that are stakeholder passion, that are purpose-driven, that have brands that really merit contribution to communities, that look at multiple stakeholders and care for those needs, that are environmentally and sustainably responsible. All of those companies on every index you would care about: stock performance, employee engagement, high talent retention, profitability, margin contribution, customer loyalty, brand loyalty. On every metric, they outperform their non-competitive, their peers who don't value those things by enormous factors, right? So if you want an incentive for why to be multi-stakeholder focused, look at the indices. I mean, there's plenty of research. We found it all. It's all in the book that says these organizations, these leaders, are leaving their competitors in the dust. So consumers are voting with their feet and with dollars. Millennials and Gen Xers have zero tolerance for brands. They'll want to pay more. They want to walk away if they'll walk away from a brand, gladly, if they think that you're not serving a greater good, to go to one that is.
Yes.
And so, you know, I mean, the writing's on the wall.
So
I think you hit the nail on the head.
Ha ha, Bruce, hysterical.
It's now sitting on your head.
Janice, quick question from you, and then I want to hear from Susan, and then we have to wrap up.
sorry. So I'm curious, Ron, what do you do as an outsider if you're not in the organization to get the change to happen?
It's a great question, Dennis. You actually have an advantage because you're not politically bad. That's why I can make the living I do. I learned early on in my career that what got me fired inside companies got me paid very well outside companies, telling the truth. So you can walk in as an outsider. Yeah, I'm not bound. You can hate me. I don't care. But I'm going to tell you, I get to walk in and tell you the truth. Here's what's happening here. You don't have to like it. You don't have to believe it. I can say to CEOs all the time, so it turns out you're part of the problem. And here's how. And if you'd like it to be different, here's how. I am not politically bound at risk to say things to you that you don't want to hear. And if you don't believe that there are people, here's my standard for all leaders. If you don't have somebody coming into your office on a regular basis, telling you things that are uncomfortable for you to hear, you can be very confident your leadership sucks.
Wow.
So if I'm here telling you something that is uncomfortable for you to hear, my script says your line is thank you, because no one else is doing it for you. So you can throw me out and tell me never met when I'm done, but hear me out because I could save your life and your career. So as an outsider, you have the privilege and the responsibility and the opportunity to say things other people inside are never going to say.
Keep blasting that megaphone, Janice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, no, but that's exactly what I do, and I agree 100%. So on the hearing access, I am that person. I always say to you, Ruth, like I'm the person who puts my head on the chopping block regularly because I speak the truth and say the things people aren't willing to say on the inside because they can lose their job. And I'm in the privileged position of being able to speak the truth. But that's, for me, horrible. I hate being the person putting my neck on the chopping block, but I do affect change because I speak the truth. And I agree with you. This is enlightening.
So, Janice, here's a slight twist on that for me. For me, now these are my clients, so maybe it's different for you, but my clients, even if I have to say surly things to them, I remind them all the time, I'm on your side. I want you to win. I want you to be successful. I want to help you be better. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you're not looking to, hurt people and be cruel and be mean. I'm just telling you, I have a diagnosis here that I've done. This is what the MRI says. The MRI says stage 3. It doesn't say stage 1. So, but I'm on your side. And I think if you remind people you're their ally, you're not the adversary, you're not the enemy, right? Yes, I know ancient wisdom says that you can't be a prophet in your own land, but remind them, you asked me the question. I'm here to help you be better. I'm not here to shame you, condemn you, publicly, ridicule you and, embarrass you. That's not my intent. My intent is to help you be better. If you decided there's no opportunities for you to be better, you shouldn't be leading.
Yeah. Love it. Susan Bernstone, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh boy, we don't have enough time to hear all of my thoughts on this. But Ron, first of all, I want to just say this is fabulous. I cannot wait to read the book. I am definitely going to read the book. There is so much that you're saying that resonates. So I'll just highlight a couple of points that came to mind as I was listening to all of everything that you said and what everybody else said. So the first thing is the family therapist lens that I use was just all over this because every single point I kept thinking about how it starts in the family and how, what do parents do? Do as I say, not as I do. Number one, right? That they're not true. And I kept thinking about family gatherings when the cousins come and they feel like they've been talked about, so they don't feel like fitting in. Okay, so I don't want to go on about that, but there's a lot to be said. Right, there's a lot to be said through the family therapy systems lens. Okay, we can write a book together on that. The other thing is I want to address Susie in terms of the brain and some of the conversations that you were having around that. Here's how and Ron, you actually said this in many ways, and here's how I always see people's behavior is that they are doing it to survive. If you look at behavior in survival mode, then it shifts it from they're doing something wrong and crazy and evil and illegal and all that. And in some cases, it's behaviors that they learned that have worked before, but are no longer working. and or they're in survival mode. And when we think about ourselves, when we're in survival mode, what do? We lose all sense of like reality and what's good, and we're just doing what we need to do to survive. The other thing that I want to add to and highlight, and Bruce, what you were saying, and you were going a couple of things in terms of different industries, is what came to mind was the hospitals. And Ron, the point about what happens at the seams, the image that I immediately got was the hospital system, where you have one side that is really looking at patient outcomes in terms of care, and then you have the hospitals are profit-making institutions. And what happens with the CFO and the COO or CEO, and what happens at the seams of those hospitals. And in hospitals where
or how about them and the physicians?
Right, and where you see them advocating and working together, those hospitals are doing better. And the last point that I wanted to make was here's what's so interesting is because a lot of the people that you're talking about that aren't doing, those managers that are really, excuse my language, what looks like sucky managers, or all those people in places where you think, what are they doing? I see them in my office as in therapy, and what do? They talk about what's going on in with me. And so I've been in a position actually because they talk about work. I've had people from educational institutions at high levels talking about what's going wrong in their places of business. And it's been an interesting position to coach them in terms of what they need to do differently. So we have lots to talk about, Ron. I love this. This was phenomenal. Thank you.
I can have coffee with you for hours. I just want to punctuate the point that you made that was brilliant. Because leaders are often bad diagnosticians, right? And they often look at somebody's bad behavior as self-interest. And as soon as I tell them, reframe it, look at it as self-protection. And the minute you understand that it's more likely self-protection than it is self-interest ever, you have a whole different, doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it. And it gives you a whole different pathway out of it.
And the other thing is when you have an employee, and you can do this, Janice, you talked about the unions, but I think that it can be done because, again, my family systems brain, when you say you can't fire them, well, we can't fire our mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers as much as we'd like to. That relationship is always there. So if we think about how we manage that, and, when you ask people, so somebody's not doing their job, right, whatever they are, and you say to them, okay, did you tell them what's expected of them? Oh, no, I can't tell them that. Have you sent them for any improvement training? Have you helped them to teach? Oh, no. And it's like, well, why not? We can't do that. Well, yes, you can. And that's what needs to be done. So, and when you're talking about honesty, Ron, that's all it is. Be honest with the person. Here's the expectation. Here's what your job is. Oh, you're not doing that. Okay, let's figure out a way together to get you to do what your job says. It's so simple, and sometimes it's these simple things that just don't get done. So I'll be quiet now and let somebody else speak.
Love that.
Bravo, Susan.
Devin, you're muted. While you unmute, I want to just follow up on what you were saying, Susan and Ron. I study the high achievers, and high achievers have zero tolerance, zero patience for not telling the truth and not being transparent and not acknowledging the good work and all of those things that you discussed. And they will be the first out the door, which means you will be left with, at best, the average employee, at worst, those who are below average and are the duds and don't care, et cetera, and are doing it for the paycheck.
Ruth, I tell you, your best talent's going to quit and leave, and your worst talent's going to quit and stay.
Yes, That's right.
Right.
Devin,
so why is it that?
words.
Why or how do people lose their sense of purpose and end up in this cycle of self-preservation?
Well, it's a great question, Devin. Either they never found it in the first place, right? There's often the misattributed Mark Twain quote of two most important days of a day we're born, but day we find out why. I think many people spend their lifetime looking for a why, and they get caught in a cycle of economic paycheck. They get the kids, the mortgage, and suddenly they're like up to 50 years old and they're depressed and suicidal. And so I think organization is it behooves them. What Best Buy did was started with the people on the floor in the stores and ask them, when are you at your best? and rather than trying to impose a corporate purpose, cultivated their sense of high achievement and orientation toward performance, and then matched it to the company purpose, right? I think if we can unleash, everybody wants to matter. It's hardwired. We want to matter. We want to know we're significant. We want to know that our contributions are meaningful. Everybody wants that. So if you can tap into what that is and unleash it, that's when you find nobody wants to be bored, useless, and irrelevant. Most of us fear it, but nobody wants it. And so I think if you can, and when you see that person, so in the book I talk about doctors in Sweden in the early 90s discovered a bizarre phenomenon of children who, coming in from asylum from the Ukraine into Sweden, suddenly, when they learned that their risk of asylum might be rejected, they might have to go back to the Ukraine, they began to fall into comas. So they were perfectly healthy. All the biometrics were perfectly fine, but they slipped into comas, and they would have to be tube fed and diapered, and they were vegetative, but perfectly healthy. The cure, and they called it resignation syndrome, was the name of the disease, and the cure for it is hope. The minute those children would hear that their asylum was granted, that they were safe, they would wake up. Some of them children stayed in those comas for a year and a half, 2 years, right?
Whoa.
I think employee disengagement is the resignation syndrome of our companies, and meaninglessness is the virus that causes disengagement.
Absolutely.
So pep talks and free lunches and foosball tables and perks are not employee engagement. They're cosmetic. But giving people the chance to do their best work, to become their best selves, to feel like to know their voice and their fingerprints matter, and go home every night proud and excited to come back the next day, that's the cure. And if you're not spending your job as a manager doing that, I don't know what you're doing.
And also sometimes, what you can also see is that what's happening down below and in the middle is reflective of those top leaders, and they're not looking inside themselves. That it's easier in some companies for people to be talking about their employees or the industry or the stockholder, whatever, but the leaders need to also look at themselves. And Ron, I'm sure that that's what you're doing in your work, is you're challenging them and saying, you need to be looking at what you're doing and feeling and what's going on with them inside as humans, because they need to be vulnerable and to be honest about, when we see those people taking credit for other people's work, usually the best managers are the ones that aren't taking the credit and are having their people take the credit.
Yep.
So
your job is to make other people shine.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Ron, I really loved having you. And I knew the first time we spoke, your honesty just came through. So I knew then that your book was going to be so great. And a fun fact, how Ron and I met, we're both part of we have several overlapping groups, but when I was looking at a specific publisher for my upcoming book, I was looking for other people who I knew who were using the same publisher, just to get their insights of what's behind the curtain. What am I getting myself into? And I spoke to Ron, and Ron must have spoken to me for over an hour and really told me everything. He laid it all out there. And I wrote notes, which I constantly look back at. He practiced what he preached. And I am forever grateful for that. And Ron, I am forever grateful for you coming and sharing your brilliance with us. And I actually looked on the Amazon bestsellers, and you are climbing, my friend, and it's not even launch day. I think tomorrow, when your book, To Be Honest, comes out, it is going to be a hit. So good luck with that. I know it's already a hit all over the world. Tomorrow is the US launch. So good luck with that. I want all of our high achieving friends to tell all of our audience where they can find out more about you. And for those of you who are listening in a few days to our podcast, which is the audio of this video that we have, please leave us a rating and review. Everyone here is a volunteer. Everyone is giving of their time, talking about giving of service. We just want to help as many people as we can, and we want people to be able to find us. So if you actually leave a rating and review, that will help people, the algorithms, help people find us. So with that, Dr. Susan Bernstone, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me you can email me, drsusanburnstone@gmail.com. You can go on LinkedIn. You can go on Facebook. You can go to the Mentor Project. I am all around. So please do reach out to me. And Ron, I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Me too.
Thanks, Susan. Janice.
This was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I can be found at hearingaccess.com and janicelintz.com and of course, LinkedIn.
Thanks, Janice. Devin.
Another amazing week, Ron. Thank you so much. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Very insightful. Devon at devonharris.com, on Instagram and Twitter at keeponpushing88. On Facebook, I'm the dude in the Jamaica bobsled speed suit. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn.
Not a unitard,
Not a unitard.
Devin, I've been loving your Instagram lately. Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. This was great. This reminded me of a time when I once told a senior leader in an academic place, I like to be frank. And that person said, "Oh, well, some people don't like frank." And I wasn't talking about hot dogs then.
Gross.
Reach me at bruceyle.com or Bruce at Bruce_Y_Lee on Twitter and other social media. You can also Google me, Bruce Y. Lee Forbes, for my articles. And just remember the Y. But thanks.
So Ron,
Thanks,
you can give Bruce a word that you'd like to see him use in an article. You can challenge him right now. Pick a word or a concept and give it to Bruce, and you'll be seeing it this week in an article.
I want to see snail. Escargot snail.
Ooh, all right, Bruce. You got it? Susie.
Hi. So you can find me at photowings.org, photowings.org. That's my nonprofit. I part of the Mentor Project, and I did a video on the Mentor Project. You can find there a little bit more about my work, both my personal photography and Photo Wings, or you can go to susankatzphotography.com to see a little bit of my work. And this has just been fascinating.
Thank you, Susie. Ron, where can people find you?
Well, first, I just want to say, I just felt like I did a dinner party with great friends. This was such a one. Thank you so much for a wonderful evening. I could do this we should just have pour wine and do this all night. So thanks for having me. And I want to return the graciousness. Since we met, I have just been fascinated by your work. I am glad you chose to publish with KP, but I'm more glad you chose to write that book because it's a great book. I've been sharing it with my clients. I think it was important to understand how not only to protect high achievers, but get more of them. So thanks for your good work in the world as well.
Thanks, Ron.
You can find me at Navalent, NAVALENT.com. You'll find videos and all kinds of treasure trove of ebooks we have to download there. It's my firm. You can, if you want to learn more about the book, we have a great TV series called Moments of Truth. So if you want to meet all the heroes in the book, when I interviewed them, I videoed it. And so we kept years, and so now we have a whole TV series called Moments of Truth, and you can find them all at tobehonest.net. There's videos and webinars of the book, and you'll find every episode of Moments of Truth to meet some of the great people I got to talk to.
Beautiful. And Ron, where are people finding your book, To Be Honest?
You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.com, Walmart.com, or any bookshop in your area where books are sold. Please patronize your local bookstores. And thank you. Please, selfishly, I'll say, if you buy it, please leave a review on Amazon because those make a big difference.
Yes, they do.
And email me your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.
Thanks, Ron. And behind the scenes, making us all look fabulous, is Dr. Debbie Heiser, the CEO of the Mentor Project, who hosts us here each and every week. So thank you, Debbie, who is always helping the mentors, and the mentors learn from each other. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Ruth Gotian. I can be found at ruthgotian.com and on all the social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse. It's just my name, Ruth Gotian. So I really look forward to talking to you and learning together. Everyone, thank you. We are going to be off next week. Enjoy Memorial Day. Enjoy what we hope will be great weather. And thank you very much to all of those who served our country as we honor Memorial Day. Bye, everybody.